Okay, let's look at the fairness argument. Kieran Gilbert asked the PM yesterday about the defined benefit scheme for politicians. I don't think that should be changed, but in the sake of fairness, if they're setting this fairness argument up, is that fair game now?
Well, it certainly should be, because we know that that's just as expensive to the public purse as is private savings. And in fact, some of those more generous public sector schemes would see the equivalent of balances in the tens of millions of dollars. Now, if you're going to challenge those in the private sector, you should also challenge those in the public sector. And that includes politicians that are going to be leaving office with very large balances indeed. The equivalent of very large balances indeed.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Is this a coalition policy now? You know, would you change this on your own volition at the next election? Because I think there's still a great nobility in, you know, dedicating your life to public service. We still want the best and brightest people in there. We know the long hours and the sacrifices that are made, sure, and you're paid pretty well. But is this the quid pro quo, that you dedicate your life, or a portion of your life to politics, and then you get the payoff at the end?
Well, if you're going to make retrospective changes, and let's be honest, this is a retrospective change because it isn't grandfathered. It is a retrospective change, and that people have relied on making decisions in the past that are going to be affected by this in the future. I think what's good for the goose is definitely good for the gander. Understand that public servants now are not under that old system. They, like politicians, now pay money into superannuation just as normal people in the private sector would do. But those in the past that have taken advantage of a very generous system will be on pensions for a very long time that will cost the public purse. I'm not entirely sure why the Labor Party would exempt public servants but impose that upon those that have saved in the private sector, specifically those that have put money into a self-managed super fund and taken control of their own financial future within the rules that existed at that time. That seems profoundly unfair to me. If you want a fairer super system, it should be fairer for all Australians, not just some Australians.
Well, you've got a chance to fight for this at the next election. If it is legislated this term but doesn't come into effect until after the next election, what is your commitment today? That you will repeal it?
Well, we will see exactly what this legislation entails. We'll certainly block it, we'll certainly amend it, but we know that it's going to sail through the Senate with the help of the Greens and potentially the Independents as well. Although I would think that they would have pause for thought on this one. A lot of those people that will be affected are in their electorates, and they'll probably want to consult with them before they make a definitive decision and not be blinded by the rhetoric of this Labor government, which is talking about fairness of the superannuation system, but in fact this is simply fairness, this is simply a budget repair measure. We would hope that rather than legislate in this term of Parliament, Labor would be true to their word. They would seek a proper mandate and legislate in their next term of Parliament, which is exactly what the Coalition did back in 2016. Flagged the change, were elected in, implemented the change. That's the way it should be. Anything else is simply tricky.
Okay, but if you're so incensed about this announcement yesterday, if it's such a bad broken promise, why can't you say today that black and white, if you're elected at the next election, you'll reverse this decision?
Well, I think that we would love to be able to do that. However, as you know, Laura, getting things through a hostile Senate is never easy. This is an easy Senate for the Labor Party. You know that the Greens are going to help them in. The next Senate is unlikely to be friendly towards a coalition government. It would be very difficult for us to put that legislation forward with any expectation that it would get through. Now, let's reassess what the Senate looks like. Let's reassess what a coalition government would look like in government after the next election.
Well, yeah, but no one ever makes policy.
We don't put legislation up that's...
Oh, you dictated
we don't
by
put
a hostile
legislation up
Senate
that we know will not get through.
Really?
Well, we think that there'll be a hostile...
It's all about negotiation. That was the whole last term.
I think that if there is a large Greens component in the next Senate, we would find that we would never get any repeal to this sort of legislation through, and I think you know that too. That's why we want to see it blocked now. That's why we want to see it amended now, to make sure that it doesn't affect those people that have relied on the system the way it was, rather than the way that Labor would like it to be. Their purpose of superannuation is to use it as a cash cow to pay for their spending commitments. We would like to see Labor control their spending in the budget rather than coming after your money.
Should we take that to mean that you will be making policy this term based on what you think can get through the Senate?
Well, we'll always make policy based on our principles, and our principles will always be do not tax where you do not need to. We are always going to be a party of lower taxes, and we certainly don't intend to make retrospective changes particularly on people's retirement savings when they've relied on a system in the past and made decisions based on that system in the past. So I think you know exactly where the coalition would be coming from on superannuation and on managing the budget too. We want to spend within our means.